A lot of new real estate investors start cold calling and are finding that they can't find any deals. A big reason for this is due to a poor cold calling script. In today's video, I'm going to be acting out the dialogue in my exact cold calling script to teach you how to effectively cold call. I've already made a part 1 to this video explaining the first half of the script, so today's video is just about the second half. The part you use when you have a homeowner who is actually interested in selling their home. If you are new to the channel, my name is Justin Yaron. I'm a real estate investor and entrepreneur here in Las Vegas. I've made hundreds of videos teaching people about real estate, and the goal of this channel is to help you grow your money and mindset. Also, if you want more personal content, follow me on Instagram at Justin Yaron. The first thing I would like to say is that if you haven't already watched part 1 of this video, I suggest you do so, and you can find the link in the description. That video explains in great detail exactly what to say to these homeowners the first time you are speaking to them, and it explains why to say those things. This video is just a continuation upon that script once you have a homeowner who is actually interested in selling. Okay, so the starting point for this conversation that I'm going to be role playing, the seller has just said that they are interested in selling, and here's what you say next. Great, you mind if I share with you how we work just to see if it even makes sense for us to keep talking? And from there, the seller will either say yes or no. If they say no, they are not interested in selling. If they say yes and they want to hear more, that's when you start to establish the rules for the future questions that you are going to be asking them right after. So if the seller says, yeah, that's fine, you can tell me about how you guys work, you would say something like this to establish the rules. Perfect, I appreciate your time. Typically what happens on these calls is I'm gonna ask you some questions, some might be personal, and obviously I have to do that just to see if it even makes sense for us to work together. Is that fair? Yeah, that sounds pretty fair. Great. And look, even though that seemed very fast, a lot happened in those few sentences. The first thing I did was show my appreciation for the seller for giving their time, because their time is valuable and you want them to understand that you value their time. Because I said, first off, I appreciate your time. The next thing I did was set the expectation for what was going to happen next in this call. I said, typically what happens on these calls is I'm gonna ask you some questions, and some might be personal. This is a very important question to ask. This statement is extremely important because as you ask more questions, you will be asking personal questions to figure out why they need to sell. You may even have to ask the seller questions about their mortgage, which a lot of sellers might feel is so personal. But because you're asking up front if it's okay for you to ask these personal questions, when the time comes to it and you start asking these questions, and if the seller for some reason starts to get offended of like, hey, these are way too personal questions, you can always say something like, oh, I apologize, I thought we established at the beginning that it was okay for me to ask you some questions. And usually when you tell them that, they are reminded of what they agreed to, and they usually kind of say, oh, okay, that's fine, yeah, go ahead. So that is why it's so important to set these rules. The next thing I said was this. Obviously, I do that to determine if it even makes sense for us to keep talking. And the reason why I say this to the seller is because I want to put in their mind that this has to make sense for me too. It's not just about them getting their number. The deal and the numbers have to make sense for me, and I'm letting them know that if it doesn't make sense for me, I'm walking away, and I'm trying to set that expectation in their mind. And then I simply got their confirmation if all that makes sense. I said, is this fair? And they said, yes. And once you get that yes, then you can start to move on and ask more of the pain questions. From that point, you want to figure out why they want to sell. Here are a few questions that I typically ask a prospect. By the way, what has you considering selling? This is a very direct and open-ended question as to why they want to sell without saying the word why. And the reason why I worded it this way and saying, what has you considering selling? Instead of saying something like, why do you want to sell? Or why are you considering selling? If you really think about it, the word why has a very negative meaning in most people's eyes. Think about when you were a kid. If you ever did something wrong, usually an adult would be asking you, why did you do that? Like maybe if you spilled some milk or you spilled some food on the ground, your parents are like, hey, why'd you do that? If you did something wrong in class, being a class clown or whatever, the teacher's asking you, why did you do that? Why is a very bad word in most people's eyes. It makes us feel attacked. It makes us feel like we did something wrong. So I personally try not to use the word why when I'm speaking to sellers and asking them questions because I don't want them to feel attacked. Instead, I'll ask, by the way, what has you considering selling? Another pain question I will ask is this: how long have you considered selling? Or if the seller was a little bit more open with the reason as far as why they are selling, if they have a problem, I could word that differently. I can say something like, how long has that been a problem? All I am trying to do with this question is to gauge how motivated the seller is. How long have they had their problem for? How long have they been dealing with it? It gives me an indication of how tired they might be and how motivated they really are. Because if someone's had a problem for a long time and it's really eating at them, maybe their tenants haven't paid them in months, then they have a lot more motivation than someone who doesn't have a big problem. As you hear more from the seller about their situation and their problem, here's another thing that I ask them. And I usually ask the next question just to kind of poke and prod when they tell me about something and I want to know a little bit more about it if they're not opening up all the way. Can you tell me more about that? Or I'll say something like, what have you tried to do about selling it? The important thing to know in those questions is that we're just trying to fully understand the homeowner. We ask the question of, can you tell me more about that, to get deeper into their problem? And then we ask the question of, what have you tried to do about selling it? Or if they explain more about their problem, you can say something like, what have you done to try to solve that problem? We are simply using clarifying questions so that you have a full understanding of their situation. The more you understand the situation of the seller, the more likely it is that they will sell to you because they will feel like you actually understand them and they will feel like you want to help them, which you should. And the last pain question that I ask is this: are you currently working with another real estate professional? I ask this question just to see if they're working with a realtor or maybe multiple other investors. I want to get an idea of what's going on, who they're in contact with, just so I have a game plan and so I know if I'm competing against someone else. And just so you understand, I know that that list of questions was relatively small, but these are all their pain questions. You're trying to dig deep into their pain and why they want to sell. And this is honestly going to be the longest part of the phone call if you do it right. And if you get them to trust you to open up about their situation, this will definitely be the longest part of the conversation. But once you have a full understanding of their situation, you want to summarize it to them. You want to let them know that you've been listening and that you are here to solve their problem. So typically, when I have enough information about their pain and they're kind of done talking about that, I say something like this to summarize. I really appreciate you sharing all that information with me. Given everything we've talked about, I just want to make sure I understand you fully. You want to sell because you've had a problematic tenant and they haven't been paying, they've been beating up the home, messing it up, and you just don't want to deal with them anymore. Did I get that right? And if you asked all the right pain questions from earlier, they will say, yes, you got that exactly right. That's exactly what I'm going through. From there, I want to gauge how important it is for the seller to get this done and for them to sell their home. So I will ask something like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you to get this done? Not necessarily with me, but just to get it done. So 1 meaning if you do nothing, you'll be fine. 10 meaning you need to get it sold. Usually, the seller will take a little bit of time to think about that question, and then they'll give you their rating. They will give you their score for how important it is for them to sell their home. And really, the scores that I'm looking for are the 8, 9s, and 10s. So if they say something like, maybe it's a 5, that's my rating, then I might say something like, oh, I'm confused. I thought it was very important for you to get this sold. And it is super important for us to go through this step because if you're planning to buy their home from them at a big discount, typically the seller will need some type of big motivation for them to sell the home. Maybe they're behind on taxes, maybe they're about to lose their home due to foreclosure. There may be a lot of different reasons as far as why they need to sell their home, but you have to gauge how important is it to them. And if it doesn't seem very important based on their score, just question them on it. Just ask them, hey, I'm a little bit confused. And if they give a low score, just question them about it. You can ask them, hey, I'm a little bit confused. I thought it was important for you to get this home sold. And once I understand how important it is to them to get their home sold, then I try to get them to commit without asking them to commit. So I'll say something like this. In the past, with other sellers that I've worked with, I found that there are 3 main things that have prevented us from working together. 1 is time, 2 is money, and 3 are other people involved. Now, of those 3, which of those do you think would stop us from working together? The reason why I asked that question is because I want to address the obstacles up front. Those were probably the most common obstacles that I run into with sellers. It's either the money, like the price, the time, how fast they want you to close on their home, or even if they want an extended period of an escrow, you want to know that. And then other people. Every time someone sells a home, there are usually other decision makers involved, even if they are not actual owners. For example, if you are speaking to an older gentleman and he's the only person on title, so he's the only one that owns the home, but he has to talk to his son first about selling the home before he sells it, that son is now a decision maker even though he's not on title. So if you ask the seller upfront about the decision makers or any other obstacles upfront, you will know all the obstacles before you run into them later, which allows you to prepare for them and overcome those obstacles. So at this point, you know that that homeowner wants to sell, you know that they are motivated, you know that they are ready to sell, you know their pain and motivation. Now you want to focus on the next steps. And the next steps are going to look different for everyone depending on your individual business model. For some people, the next step might be to set a future phone appointment so that you have time to analyze the numbers, crunch all the numbers, and then talk to them again about everything. For other people, it might be setting the phone appointment not with themselves, but with another person in their organization, their sales agent. The next step might even be setting an in-person appointment so that you can try to close the deal in person. I can't be the one to decide what the best next steps are for you and your business because every person's business is different. Just determine what the best next steps are for you and your business. Also, if you want to grow your real estate business, whether you are brand new or if you already have deals under your belt, DM me the word coach on Instagram at JustinYou'reWrong. See you the next one.